Happy New Year, everybody. I'm trying to choke back the laughter as there seems to be a betting pool on the side as to whether I can pronounce our guest's name correctly. However, I did have a chance to work with this particular person, so I had a little bit of practice. So hopefully I'm not ostracized forever for mispronouncing it. But Steve's about one of the coolest cats in town, so I don't think he's going to hold me too much accountable for it. I mean, he himself says that his name is missing a couple vowels here and there, ever since, they were stolen from, I guess, his last name. But anyways, long story short, we do have a really great chat today. We are going to kick off this new year with someone that both David and I had the pleasure of working with over at Eidos Montreal. Steve has actually, I don't know how many years he's been there, but he's been there for a while. And considering the latest product coming out of that studio being Guardians of the Galaxy, which we've had a couple of streams already to talk about this game, considering it has such a huge focus on like that IP of Guardians of the Galaxy had such a huge dependency, or part of the DNA is music and sound. Obviously, Steve's role on this game was extremely important. So it's going to be interesting to pick his brain on how he approached that, and what the trials and tribulations of that particular experience was. He's been in audio for a really long time. We will get into that in the stream. He's even in a band. He still like rocks out on a regular basis. So I think it was a really interesting opportunity for him, and I'll let him tell that story. But I know that he was pretty excited about working on a game like this, because it seemed almost like the planets aligned for him, and all the things he loves to do, he got to spend a lot of time doing all of those amazing things. So I'm going to bring in David like I usually do and stop talking in circles, and we'll bring in Steve, and we'll get this show on the road. Here he comes. Hello, David. Hey, I'm out of practice. I'm all over the place. I'm like a.
It's all good.
I'm like
it's
an
a
avalanche.
new year, so let's get this started. Pretty excited, as you mentioned. We both have the chance to work with Steve, and what is great with those stream, we have the chance to meet new people we never met with, and also to reconnect with old friends. So today, that it's definitely the case. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's bring him in. Let's have a little chat with, hold on, Steve Szczepkowski. See how I did? How'd I do? Hey, well put that in your pipe and smoke it, Patar.
Well done.
Welcome, Steve. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm surprised and impressed. It was pretty good. It was pretty good.
It was very well done. Very well done.
I didn't practice all night. I didn't stay up all night and practice, in case you were wondering. That's a brutal rumor. Yeah, okay. No, you didn't do that. No, I didn't have it. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with us, man.
Thanks for having me. It's great seeing both of you. It's been a long time. We haven't hung out and sat and talked, and it's nice to see Dave when we're both able to catch our breaths and not be sweating. We were CrossFit workout mates for a while. So, you know,
I think it was our way to cope with, you know, the with production in general. Like, okay, we need this hour that we're just going to go down and you know, get
was
out
so
of breath
healthy.
and just get it all out.
Yeah.
And then we come back in the afternoon. We're super zen, and we can
Yeah.
finish the rest of the day. That's
It was honestly, it was very helpful at many times, and it was always great when you were there to train with you. So it was fun.
yeah. You were my endorphin buddy.
Everyone needs one of
I'll
those.
take it. Everyone needs a buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, just gotta say before we start, I mean, obviously, congrats for the game. It was amazing to see all the great reviews coming out for the game itself, for the narrative element, for the characters, for the soundtrack, the music, the sound, and all that, and you know, for having went through AAA production myself, I know that especially for you that was there since the beginning, it's a 4 or 5 years, you know, project. So not only it's it's you have the satisfaction, but it's sometimes you have the relief as well that, you know, all this was for something, and we can finally be proud because we've all observed, you know, other team that was less fortunate to work super hard for super long, and then it's not well received at all by the critic, and that's just crushing when that happens.
It is crushing, and I mean, whenever you hear about something like that or you see it, I mean, like you said, as anybody who's worked in the dev cycle, you know, there's no sort of satisfaction of like, oh cool, our game's doing well and their game, like, you're, you know, as a human being, like maybe if you were like, you know, 20 and still in that sort of insecure, finding myself in life place, not that there's anything wrong with being 20, believe me, but just saying is that at this stage, like, you don't see it the same way, and because you've put in all these years and you've done that 5-year trip where maybe the game did really well, or you did a 4 or 5 year trip and it didn't get received well, you can kind of appreciate the time and energy that goes into it. And often, you know, these things are maybe elements that are outside of the production team's control, you know, because there's so many variables from marketing and this and that. And so I'm just saying is, you know, it's a great point that you bring up, and it's very unfortunate when you see games that people have poured their heart and soul into. They've taken time away from their families, and then the game gets just like, you know, reamed on the internet or destroyed. And, you know, I know it's always easy for people to, you know, it's almost like that schoolyard thing of you see like a pylon and you don't even care who's on the bottom. You just run and jump and, you know, pylon.
I want to be part of the pylon. Exactly.
That's it. But there is somebody on the bottom, you know, and you are stepping on somebody. So I don't know. I'm a lot more sympathetic to that, having, like you said, you know, I'm not a kid anymore. I've done 15 years just at Eidos on its own.
15. Wow.
Yeah.
This is 15
year.
15 year. So can we just go back a little bit in time and go back to this moment when you joined Eidos Montreal? Because I mean, just in general, the studio.
I'll give you a fun history. So, yeah, I'll talk. You guys can just stop me when I'm rambling. So basically, I went back to school at 30. And I went to Trebas. I'd been playing in bands all my life. I always wanted to be, you know, involved in music and rock and roll. I worked at a bar, booking all the bands. I learned how to do live sound while doing it. So I've really taken the long scenic route to wherever I've gone, which, you know, it comes with a bit more bumps and bruises, but it's usually comes with a lot more fun, exciting, freaky experiences as well.
What were you doing before 30 then? You said you went back to school at 30, but what were you doing?
Yeah, all I was doing, I was basically, well, people need to remember that, you know, I'm not a spring chicken. So going back in the Stone Age before 30, we didn't even have the internet or anything like that. There was no internet. So the whole multimedia industry in Montreal, when I came out of Trebas, was non-existent. You had, at the time, it was, I don't even think it was Behavior. They were called A2M maybe. Or maybe they were Behavior, or anyway.
A2M,
so you had them in Ubisoft. That was it. And so I spent, months trying to get a gig. Like I finished, it was funny, the Trebas school, like we started with 2 classes. And I remember the teacher standing there, and I'm, of course, like I'm 30 and I'm paying my own way, and I'm surrounded by all these young kids,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like with the headphones sideways, and I'm here to make beats, and I'm like, okay, let's see how that works out.
Some of them are just there because their parents wanted them out of their freaking basement, basically.
Pretty much. And the guy stood there in front of the class, and he goes, out of everyone here, he goes, only 3% of you are going to graduate, and only 1% of you will get jobs in the industry. And I was like,
that's a perfect motivation speech.
I was like, why didn't somebody tell me this before I signed?
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, Szczepkowski, like, this isn't high school. You're not here to F around. You're here. You're paying your way. Like, big difference. High school, sitting in the back of the class with, the Black Sabbath jean jacket and the feet up on the desk. And now I'm like front of the class 10 minutes early with the notepad and the Apple.
What the hell has happened to you? Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, big difference. But I made sure I was going to be in that 1%. And sure enough, when we finished the class, what started out as 2 classrooms ended up being 6 people, 7.
Wow.
Out of like 40 something, because
like
it was so intensive. So intensive. And if you, unfortunately, if you got sick and couldn't go to class for like a week or 2, like the climb back would be like epic, because it moved at such a fast pace, and you had labs, and nobody's got gear at home, so you'd have to go to the studio to do your homework and your lab. So anyway, it wasn't for kids. Like, you had to be serious. So I came out of there. I spent 6 months still just like working in the bars, trying to put enough money together every month to pay my rent. I used to get gigs. I live off the island of Montreal, so it's about a 15-minute car ride. I didn't even have a car for the longest time, so I would bike everywhere. I would get a gig at like Pub St. Paul to do sound downtown, and I would bike there through the bridge and everything. And then coming back, like it's pitch black, 3 a.m, and I didn't want to spend the $20 because I needed it to take a taxi. So I'd bike home. I'd be throwing my bike over fences because they locked the bridge and stuff. Like, it was just, sometimes you're driving at night, and at the last minute you see they've put a chain across, and you're like, don't.
Man.
I'm telling you. So anyway, all this to say is I finally got a job in a gaming company after sending out CVs for months and months, getting discouraged, and I finally got a gig. It was a small studio here called DC Studios, no relation to the comic. It was Digital Concepts. And the first gig I got, believe it or not, was they had no audio guy, nothing. They hired me. It was funny because the guy reached out to me. I was sending CVs like crazy. I was like, I gotta get a job, because now I'm paying back that loan, and I'm not making the kind of money I thought I would be paying it back, plus rent, plus anyway. So this guy reaches out. He goes, "Hey, can you send me some examples?" So now I'm like super excited, right? It's like a fisherman who's been sitting on the boat for 5 days, and he finally gets a nibble.
Wiggle.
So I'm sending him all kinds of stuff. I get nothing back. Like, it was soul crushing, and I'm just like, And then out of the blue, after I forgot about him, at like 3 months, he writes back, "Okay, so are you still interested in the job?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like, are you just toying with me? Are you some evil psycho sitting there somewhere? Like, jump. So in the end, I sent them, and it was funny. It was for a girls' dancing game. I had no idea. So I sent them 2 styles, like a sort of Britney Spears, very produced, polished, and something a bit more just 4/4 straight dance. So then he brings me in, and he goes, "Okay, we're ready to offer you the job." Like, I'm just like, I don't even care if you pay me. Like, I just want to do this,
Yeah.
So I get a salary, I get everything. And now I realize, okay, so what am I doing? And they're like, "You're making a Bratz dancing game." And I'm like, okay. And they're like, "And we need like 22 songs by, I don't know, in 2 months." It was like they had brought me in so late in the process. So it was ridiculous. Like, I used to meet my wife around the corner for lunch, and she'd be like, "How's it going?" And I'd be like losing my mind. Like, it's noon and I got nothing. And she's like, "Okay." I'm like, "No, you don't understand. Like, I need a song every day or I won't make it. I got nothing. I'm dying." So it was like, it was pretty stressful right from the beginning. But it was really fun, and it was a very fun small studio. So a lot of talented people that went off into the industry. You guys would know a lot of them without a doubt. And we made a lot of fun games. And it's funny, in that process, I met the first sound guy, because once we got a couple of projects, and I was like, "Oh, I get to get a team now, And the first guy I ever hired was Yoann Boudreau, who is the co-writer of the Star-Lord album, and who's also he was on my sound team when we did Human Revolution, and then Johan left to open up his own production house. So he has a full production facility in his basement, like fully functioning recording studio. So Johan then became our go-to for recording all VO and mocap. So like on Guardians, Johan was the recording engineer. So the guy who plays guitar in the Star-Lord band is also the guy who recorded all the mocap. And he's also the guy that I use to mix all of our trailers. And he actually, because we were seeing time getting tight, like this was a funny story. So I'm jumping ahead, but when we were in London this last August, we were there for 3 weeks. JS Leblanc, who's my technical director, and we were mixing the game. So at one point, late at night, and we're sitting there, and JS looks at me, and he's seeing all the Jiras coming in. And for anyone who doesn't know, Jiras are all the bugs that we get, and it's a system, so they're called Jiras. So he's seeing all the bugs coming in, and he looks at me and he goes, it's not going to work. We're not going to make it. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you got the Jiras, and he goes, and we have all the cutscenes that have had a good first pass, but not a polished pass. And he goes, we can't do both. And I'm like, all right, just leave it with me. As you guys know, when you're at the sort of top, like you're like, okay. And I'll say this, one thing that I learned is that all those years of struggling on how am I going to pay the rent this month? How am I going to, where am I going to come up with this extra $150? It kind of teaches you this real interesting survival skill where I'll say this, it's kind of like the Captain Kirk thing where I refuse to acknowledge the no-win situation because there has to be a solution. You just haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes the universe will show you that solution and you need to be paying attention. So as we finish this conversation within 20 minutes, because like I said, I'm mixing the game, but we also have trailers going out that I get back to the hotel. I'm approving trailers till like midnight and syncing with Johan. So I'm sitting on the couch, like we had a viewing couch for the big screen and JS is behind me and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, okay, what are you going to do, Szczepkowski? And I'm like, shut up. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk to that voice in my head right now. And as I'm sitting there, a text comes in from Johan in Montreal and he goes, hey, just letting you know the latest trailer got approved by Marvel. And I'm like, oh, great. Thanks. Cool. Hey, what are you doing for the next month? Exactly. And he's like, I'm pretty free. And I'm like, okay, give me 20 minutes. And like, I literally run out and I find a quiet, empty room. And I poke our senior producer, Olivier Prou. And I'm like, look, man, I need 5 minutes. Like, this is like as serious as it's going to get. And I told him, I said, look, if you can get me X amount of dollars, this is the situation. I said, we can't do both. We don't have the manpower. There's, time versus manpower equals, it's not going to all get done. There's no other way around it. So what variable can we fix in this equation? And manpower was the one. But of course, manpower means, so I was like, can you get me a small outsource budget so I can bring this guy in for a month and he will do nothing but cutscenes? And he came back, he goes, approved. So within like 3 hours, 2 hours, I walk back to JS and I'm like, all cocky and proud of myself. And I'm like, so, that problem we had? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, it's fixed. Tandem. Don't worry about it. And he's like, what? No, I'm just dragging it out. But I'm like, I got Johan. I got a month. Like, we're good. We're okay. I'm all excited. He's like, oh my God, that's great. And then he was gone. Like, he's already sending all the files. Like, it was amazing how quick. Like, we literally got approved, and I think the next day Johan was working on the file. So anyway, I'll go back all this to say, so I was at DC Studios. I hired Johan, who's been with me since then up until now. So probably 20 years we've been working together. And when we needed to hire a second guy, Johan referred his buddy, who was Jean-Sébastien Leblanc. So I worked with JS on a project, just outsourced. He was doing, forget what it was, but I remember when I brought him in, he was doing music we were doing a DS game for Hannah Montana. So I would sit there watching JS playing like rock country guitar all day, recording guitar. I'm like, how did I sit here and not there? I should have been doing that. That looks fun, So he did all that. Johan scored all of Chicken Little, which is pretty amazing considering it's a DS game and it's got like a full orchestrated score behind it. So anyway, so my
And
point
that
in
was
all
still at
this is
DC, right?
that was at DC Studios, yeah.
Okay.
So the point I was making is that was 20 years ago, and I still work with those people today. So I think
That's cool.
That's a good sign that we have a good relationship, and we obviously have a lot of respect for each other. And I think it's one of those. I mean, I often equate things to a band dynamic because I've spent so many years in bands, and it's like I said, you know, you look at a lot of famous bands, they don't always. And I'm not using this as a reference to us, but I'm just making a statement: is that, you know, these bands, they don't always love each other, or, you know, they hang out outside, but when they get together to make music, they all know that they can rely on each other and that the magic will happen. Yeah. And I think that's what you get to, is that, you know, and again, you know, I love everyone I work with, but we don't necessarily hang out 24/7. I mean, we got families, we got stuff to do, but when it's time to work, we all kind of roll up our sleeves, and there's no like, okay, you know, who's doing, it's like, okay, you got it, okay, let's go, you know. And I'm sure you guys can relate. You've all worked with, you know, very talented teams as well, you know.
Yeah, I don't know, Steve, if you have a chance to look at the Get Back documentary from the Beatles that was released a couple. It's pretty impressive because you see the personal difference and all that, but when they get together to jam, you're like, holy shit, this is like magic. He's going to do something and he's doing something else, and it's just building and building.
It all works.
It's I agree with you. Having a team that you trust and you know how to work well with takes time to do, but when you have it, you want to bring them wherever you're going afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a lot of fun working together, and then DC Studios, after about 5 years, went under, and they moved to the US. So I found myself a year, like I had just moved into my house, so I was here like a year. And we had my first daughter, Jamie. So my wife is on mat leave, and it's like, I open my email and it's like, hey, dude, the studio's closed. We're not getting paid. Everything's done. And I'm like, what? And I was literally starting my vacation at a cabin I had rented in Tremblant for a week. So we went up to the cabin, and I remember we went to the village, and I'm like, no, we can't do anything. We can't afford to do anything. We can look at people and go, that looks fun.
Yeah. I got some good news and I got some bad news. The good news is our vacation's been extended. The bad news is we can't do anything except for sit in a cottage and stare at each other for like 5 weeks.
Which was pretty much what we did. But it was funny because the stress too, because I'm like, okay, I'm out of a job, and now everybody out here is going to be looking for work, and I'm competing against all these people, you know. So it was very stressful. And it was funny, I had a name or a contact of the HR person at the time at Eidos, and I think Eidos had just come on the market. And I sent a CV, and it was funny, like I think I prolonged our leaving for vacation because I said I need to update my CV and send a bunch out. Like I won't relax knowing, you know, I left the ship and everything's empty, you know. So I went and sent a bunch of CVs out, and I came back from vacation, and I actually had a response from Eidos, and they were like,
that's awesome.
"Oh, we didn't hear back from you yet." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I lost the gig because I was on vacation." You know? I'm like, I'm still here. And they were like, "Okay, great." I came in, I met David N. Fossey, who was the producer on Human Revolution at the time. And I just knew, like, if it was ever an interview that you're like, you got to nail this, you got to get this gig. Like, you got 2 people at home depending on you. Like, you got to get this gig. It's not open for discussion. Now go. And I went in, I just did the best I could, and I just tried to sell myself. And when I got the call, I was just like, oh my God, thank you. I mean, it wasn't not even like, okay, I'm going to be making AAA games. It was just like, I can survive, you know, I can now provide for my family. So that was a lot of stress, but 15 years ago. And then we did Human Revolution, and then we did Mankind Divided and endless DLCs. And then we jumped on Marvel's Guardians. So that's a long story to get
quite
here.
the ride.
So you mentioned that, you know, stress is definitely part of the and that's something even myself, I don't know, Brent, you've also did animated feature, VFX and all that, but for me personally, game development was way more stressful than the others, just
Always.
because of, I mean, everything is in motion, everything changes all of the time. The massive production team. It's a big marathon that everyone is running at the same time. Everything is built and broken on a daily basis, and you get forward.
You describe it so well.
How did you manage? Because I know, Steve, that we're both, and most people in this industry that make it are pretty passionate with what they are doing, but that's the advantage of, you really care about what you're doing, but sometimes it has the disadvantage that maybe you care a little too much and you need to become politically correct and all that. How was it for you in general, the management of the stress or anxiety or everything that you had to deal with in video game production?
It's a good question. When I get out of rehab, I'll let you know. No, no, but it was. I'm not gonna lie. It's not for the faint of heart, as I think both of you would attest to. And I'm not gonna lie that there's sleepless nights and insomnia and that feeling of like a rope getting tightened slowly. But at the same time, that is self-imposed because, as you said, we care so much and we're so passionate about putting something good. And again, I think part of it is also like when you see the potential of something to be great. And this game, I felt, had it. Like, you would look around and you'd see, the cinematics team just killing it. You'd see the narrative team, like you'd get a new scene recorded and you're watching it and you're like, oh my God, this is such a great, what a well-written scene. And then the performance, like, so you're seeing everybody's kind of bringing their game up. Of course, you don't want to be the one that's not holding their end of the table, right? And like, oh, sorry guys, and so that was very motivating as well. And I think where I'm getting to is, you could always see the potential. And I was always saying that is like, I'd say to my wife, I'm like, God, this game, like, I've never played anything like it because, it almost plays like an interactive movie, and I've never seen a game that had that much dialogue. And, even all of us, I'm sure Brent would attest, in the early sort of goings when they're like, it's going to be this and it's going to be like, they're not going to feel like AI. They're going to feel like real people. And you're like, yeah, okay.
Sure.
Like, yeah, sure.
Heard that before.
But huge shout out again to, the narrative team, the technical narrative team, the level designers, like everybody working on it. Everybody kind of, did what had to be done. And if there needed to be extra, they would do it. But when I started seeing how fluid and all the dialogue was, and just how well the characters came to life. And, I'm sure you guys can attest, when you start seeing something even raw, maybe it's again because of our experience, but you're like, there is some gold in there. Like there's something very special. And I'm sure, the creative core saw it as well, like JF and Olivier and Hubert. And, so I think we all kind of knew. So I'm not going to lie. I mean, COVID didn't help, like I was supposed to go to London when we recorded at Abbey Road. I missed that because it just, it didn't make sense. Like I would have had, at the time, I would have had to quarantine over there for 10 days.
And then on the way back too.
And then, well, on the way back, I would have been at home, so it would have been fine. Right. But the going there, and I thought about saying, well, you're going to work out of the hotel for 10 days, but it just didn't seem to make sense. Where we were at that point in production, I thought, it'd be nice to be selfish on this one, but I knew I'd be putting a lot of shit in jeopardy. So I said, forget it. I'm not going to go. What was great though was our composer had sent me like a Zoom link and a very high-end audio link. So every morning, because of the time delay, I would come down with my coffee and I'd watch the orchestra recording and I'd hear it in like high quality. And, as a guy who grew up on, rock and roll and bars and all of that, and never really got that much exposure to orchestrated music. And when I did, I always liked it, but you'd see it in a passing instance. And then, you're at a Metallica or a Priest concert and you're like, yeah, so having spent the last 4 years, like for me now, orchestrated music is the true heavy metal. Like it is, nothing is more powerful, like, and just, I don't know, for me, man, it's like I said, like it's a credit to Richard Jakes and the score that he did, but there's times where like I hear it and I'm just blown away and I'm like, I can't believe I get to put my name next to this, because it's that good. And the quality is like, almost to me, like film quality, like we're that's where we're striving to go, you know. And it's funny when we talk about that and people say, well, you know, is it, you know, film is here and video games are here. And I'm like, yeah, well, making a video game is probably here versus making a film. I'm like, a film's linear. I always know where, from a sound point, I always know where that explosion's going to be, and I can control everything around it to make sure. But in this game, you're like, well, you have to hear the dialogue at all times. And so it's nice to make that explosion big. But if people are talking, you know, you can't make it as big as you'd like to make it because we need to hear them. And you're like, ah. So it's,
for those who don't know, like, I just wanted to just bring something up here, like, because maybe not everyone's been exposed to just how complex, you're hinting at it right now, but how complex audio is for a video game. Because video games are obviously, they aren't linear. A lot of the actions are due to when the player decides to cross a threshold in the level, or like something happens, or they shoot a thing and then this happens. So you can't just write a score and have it just play. It needs to be all broken up into stems, and it needs to be like very, like, the amount of effort that goes into making something, the fact that it ended up feeling cinematic like a movie in the end is quite a testament, just because it wasn't just someone writing that. It was someone who was able to like put all the pieces together, and then when you play the game, it should feel like that, but it shifts, and it adapts to what you're doing in the game as a player, right?
That's it. And we haven't even spoken about branching dialogue, where you have cutscenes where there's all kinds of branching dialogue. Right. I mean, again, you know, it's, you know, Richard and I mean, it's funny. I've worked with other composers and I've had great experiences, but I don't think I ever worked as closely, like maybe because of COVID and knowing the isolation, and, you know, Richard's working alone all the time. And because he's in England, I don't know, but we spoke every day. Like, awesome. Literally, like, because there's a 5-hour difference, like he's already in his afternoon. So I'd sit down in my morning, and I'll clue you in just to how close we became. Obviously, he's a huge Marvel fan, as am I. I mean, to just give you context, I mean, I grew up, my favorite memories are just hopping on my bike, you know, and Brent, you'll remember the bikes with the banana seat and the big tall back.
I had one.
And, you know, biking to the corner store where they had all these comic books and magazines, and I'd have enough money to buy some candy and Spider-Man comics. And if it wasn't Spider-Man, it'd be like, you know, okay, Iron Man, or, you know, Ghost Rider. Like, I was always more into the sort of Marvel stuff. And I'd go home and I would just devour these comics and just laying in a swing in the backyard and reading. So getting to work on a Marvel game.
Oh yeah.
It's just
so
crazy.
Steve, actually, what was your reaction when you learned that Eidos was the next big project was Marvel?
Because I was actually more stunned. I was very stunned because when it was announced, we were still getting Mankind Divided out the door. So often, to be fair, when I'm in that late stage, like I can't even afford to look at what's passing. Like, I need, it's here. Like, this is all I need to think about for the next 5 weeks. And after that, I can re-enter life, you know? So you're looking at that. And when it came up, I was kind of like very surprised because, you know, I thought at that time, I knew the studio was putting a lot of emphasis on Deus Ex and all that. And so I was a bit surprised, but when I had time to catch my breath, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And this is pretty exciting. And I think, to be honest, it was good for me and I'm sure probably some of the other creative people would say the same. Like, it was good to get a break from Deus Ex, you know, like, I mean, I love the franchise and it's a great franchise. But too much of anything, you know, like,
well, how many years in total?
10 years.
That's it. 10 years back to back. Like, that's a lot.
And all the DLCs. So
yeah, that's it.
You know, what you found so such an explosive flavor has now been diluted because you've had it over and over again every day. Yeah. So you're sort of like, yeah, it's cool, but I'm not getting that sugar kick I was getting when I started. So now when we got into Guardians, it felt very fresh. It felt very exciting. It was like, oh, this is as different as you could be, right? Like, from the seriousness and the dark sort of, you know, dystopian cyberpunk world to like bright colors and you know, comedy and loud guitars and you know, all this stuff. It was like amazing, you know.
Yeah.
Do you remember the very first Do you remember the very first creative discussion with GF Duga, the creative director, and the rest of the core team, just in terms of in terms of audio landscape and music and all that? What do we want to do with this game?
It's one of the things I love working with this company is they do give me a lot of freedom, and I think they had their hands pretty full with like designing just the gameplay and what's going to be the game. So I think in their head they knew, like, you know, if I would have came in and said we're not going to have any licensed music, I would have expected to have been challenged and been, you know. But we were already aligned. Like when I came in and I was like, okay, so, you know, do we have a budget for licensed music, because it's part of the DNA of the game, and I really think it'll be seen badly or negatively if we don't include that in our game. And production was supportive right away. They're like, no, we agree, and so let's try and determine the budget we need. So right from the get-go, we had that budget put aside. I didn't know what it meant as far as how many songs we were going to get.
Yeah, did
And
you know
again,
how much a song can cost when you?
No, I didn't. And
okay.
and again, that's part of building the right team. So again, I've never done licensed music. I mean, I've done Deus Ex and all that, which had no licensed music. Thankfully, having been a musician and played in music, I understand how publishing and mechanical rights and licensing works. I mean, not to the degree of Randy Eckhart, who we worked with, which I'm going to get to, but that was the reason why I knew, like, step one, find the right composer. So once I synced with Richard, and he had an amazing demo package that he sent that said like awesome mixtape side one. And so right off the bat, like that gets you excited because you're like, oh my God, this guy's put a lot of thought into it. And when I heard it, it was great. So I knew once I had sat with Rich and we'd gotten Rich, I was like, okay, I know I have the right guy I'm going to war with in a composer. But now for licensed music, how do I do this? And again, talking to mutual people in the industry, somebody referred Randy Eckhart of Eckhart Consulting. And if you were to look that up, as I did, you would see that Randy did all the Guitar Hero games. So I was like, oh, perfect. That's interesting. That sounds like the exact guy I would need.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I then reached out to Randy and started talking with him. And we were all pretty much in sync of what we wanted to do. So on one side, I'd be working with Richard part of the day, and we'd be like scoping out a level and talking about music. And then I'd be like, oh, well, wait, you know, like we're going to have this licensed track here. So that even people who aren't musical would notice when you're going from like a track and then you're not in the right key where it's not harmonious. Even if you're not musical, you'd be playing and you like something's going to feel weird. It won't feel right. Anybody even with a very basic knowledge of music would kind of get I can't tell you why, but something didn't feel right. So every time we were putting a track in the game, I mean, again, credit to Richard, but I'd be like, okay, Rich, you're coming off like perfect example in chapter 1 at the flyout where you get a flock of seagulls, I ran. And I'm like, okay, Rich, we need to be coming off, like going into that song, you need to be in the proper key. And then when we come out of that, I want the music, the score to take over, and we're going to mix this down. So you need to be in the right key to segue. And he's like, okay, got it. And we find out what keys I ran in. We had to do that for, you know, every song that we used in the game outside of the huddle stuff, because that was on its own.
That it felt like it blended in, right? Like
so
otherwise
it would blend smoothly and harmoniously, because otherwise you could just say, listen, I don't care, whatever, but you would feel it, and anybody musical would go, well, that wasn't right.
For sure.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't in the right key.
Really
like
quick,
Dave,
really
you
quick.
play guitar. Dave plays guitar, so I know, Dave, you totally get it. Like if you went to a chord change that doesn't work, somebody in the band's going to do this.
Well, I would say you don't even
Who played that?
Who played
that?
You don't even need basic music knowledge. I would say it's anyway. It's the same for animation. If you have a walk cycle that has no weight, even your grandma can see that there's something wrong with it. She has no idea whatsoever why, but something is wrong. And for me, that's the same thing with music. If you're singing, you know, out of key, everyone notices.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So we had to do that, and it added to the work. But as I said, sorry, I keep jumping everywhere, but your original point of how much did a song, I had that kind of initial thought too, because I'm like, well, getting something like, let's say, We're Not Gonna Take It, or by Twisted Sister, or let's say Aha, Take On Me, which are big songs for these bands, I assumed are going to cost a lot of money compared to maybe something that's a bit lesser known, you know? And again, through Randy's guidance, he was like, no, we're gonna come in with it's something, it's pretty common in the industry, but it's basically called most favorite nation. So basically what you do is a clause is that you say, this is the amount we're paying for every song. So nobody's getting more, nobody's getting less. Everybody gets the same, because if not, you open yourself up to
bidding wars,
a negotiation, bidding war,
yeah.
you know? And then one guy goes, well, we heard this band's getting this, and
Yeah,
we're better than
exactly.
them. And,
Ego gets in the way suddenly. Yeah.
I don't have any time for that. So
yeah, you just wanted to be transactional, right? Like, here, just put it out there. This is how much we got. And if you guys want a piece of this money, then just
we got all these bands. I mean, obviously it helped that it's a Marvel title. So
yeah, for sure.
I think some of the bands, obviously their management went, oh, well, that's interesting. That's going to get a lot of airplay. And look, let's be honest, for some of these bands, I mean, it's unless they're on a classic rock station or something like these songs from the 80s, outside of licensing, they're probably not getting tons of royalties and mechanicals. So getting a license deal that just falls in your lap and it's like, hey, we're going to give you X amount of money to just let us use your song in the game. Oh, okay, great. Like, here's the send the check to this address, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So that worked out well. And there were artists that their management was like, no, we don't want to be involved. And for whatever reasons, and that's their right. I mean, when you create something, you get to choose where it gets used. I have no problems with that. I mean, for sure, it would have been nice sometimes. You're like, oh, I really want that song, and they were like, no, we want more money, and you're like, I can't do it, because if I open that Pandora's box, the whole house of cards is going to fall. So I would just walk away, and I'd find another song that would fit. And funnily enough, the opening song Autograph, to turn up the radio when he puts on his jacket and it's like that dunk 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 dunk. I had another song originally that I wanted for that and just couldn't get it because they actually wanted more money. And when I put the Autograph tune in there, and I was sort of like, oh, all right, I'll put this one. And as I got used to it, I think it was better than my original idea. And it was nice. The universe basically saying, no, you'll be better if you do this. And I'm a huge subscriber to that whole, there's cosmic forces at play, and you have to just be listening and be looking, and understand sometimes that the universe is going to go, you got this one wrong, here, let me help you out on this one.
I think especially with a video game production, because of it's all the moving parts all the time, if you're not willing to be paying attention to where the wind is blowing, you might miss out on an opportunity, right? I just wanted to point out really quickly that Richard Jacques is actually in chat. So I just wanted to shout out to Richard, because you've been doing a lot of shout outs. So thank you, Richard,
Rich?
For being here.
Richard's awesome. Yeah, I know. He's like I said, we really to show you just how close we became, we had a running gag for a long time. I mean, it still goes today, because we're both such huge Marvel fans. And I would always refer to him. So I'd come in the morning and I'd be like, morning, Mr. Stark. How's everything over at Stark Industries? And to this day, like, I'll still occasionally, it's almost like an affectionate name where I'll refer to him as Mr. Stark or Mr. S, and he'll turn to me and he calls me Mr. Thor all the time. So
I wonder why. I can't see why.
Yeah, I don't know. He's like, how's everything on Asgard today, Mr. Thor? I'm like, Asgard's good,
That's awesome.
Steve, I wanted to ask, because when I heard the amazing soundtrack at first, the first thing that struck me is like, oh, that's interesting, because the movie definitely gets its inspiration from the 70s, and the game seems to get its inspiration mainly from the 80s. So was that by design, or it just happened that after a few tries, hey, it seems that we're in where was that creative decision coming from?
That I give the credit to the creative core of like JF and Mary and all that. I think they it was a very smart move. I think they decided it was a great way to separate us from the MCU. And again, Marvel was always very supportive of telling us, make this your own, like they really were great at saying, make it your own. And that was like probably the best sort of feedback we could have gotten. So when they approached me saying, we're going to be more 80s based, I mean, I grew up in the 80s. So I mean,
bring it.
I had this encyclopedia of music that I was like, yeah, this is great. I mean, not that I wouldn't have had a big one for the 70s as well, because I mean, I'm just a huge music fan, and I would have been just as comfortable. But 80s, I think, was, you know, when I spent all my time with the Walkman on, and, you know, just constantly had music always going in my life.
You said something there that was sort of, you know, very brief, but it's actually, it deserves a bit more credit than just a quick mention. And what I mean is, you're when you said that, and this is again a shout out to the creative core team on the game,
Yep.
Because, you know, when you are in a position to have an IP like Guardians of the Galaxy, which is red hot, right? It's obviously like the movies were doing really, really well. And you got Marvel, who's now a partner in this. And they're saying, hey, we want you to make your version of this. That is a very delicate scenario, as we all know, right? And I know that, I mean, I was in a lot of those conversations, so I know it's not so easy. That sounds great, but there's a lot of implications there, because you need to find that balance. It still needs to feel canon, but you need to almost feel like it's an alternate version, like another dimension of that universe, right? And it required a lot of careful thought to sort of carve that out. And the fact that it was so successful, I guess, as a game, is that was done really well. I think that carve out, because it really does feel unique, but still feels like connected to the original subject, you know, or the original IP.
No, you're right. It's a huge balancing act that I think just a few little things that you shift to the other side of the scale and everything all of a sudden, you know what I mean? Like it's all doing this, and then it just kind of stops, and you're like, okay, nobody touched anything, you know?
Exactly.
But it's, again, you know, huge props to Marvel and to our, you know, creative team that basically said, hey, well, let's start by basing ourselves in the 80s. And then, of course, when they came to me saying, you know, oh, hey, by the way, like the reason he loves why he took the name Star-Lord is he loves this band called Star-Lord. And I was like, okay. And then they're like, so how about you doing something with that? And I'm like, okay. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you want me to do what? And they're like, well, what if we add songs? And I'm like, so you want me to write a song? And they're like, maybe.
And then you're like, well, be careful what you're asking for, because I might go to town with this idea.
Yeah. So I was like, wow, this is really exciting. And that was a whole other thought process. I mean, if you really think about it, there's close to, I'd say, 8 hours of music in this game. And I don't know how many games can make that claim, you know, like between 31 licensed tracks, over 5 hours of scored music recorded at Abbey Road, and then a 10-song hard rock album on top of that. That's like 8 hours of music in the game.
Yeah, you're producing a game and an album at the same time, basically.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy.
That's awesome. There was a part of you that there must have been a few days that you're kind of pinching yourself, because
more than
I mean, I remember the first time I was still at Eidos at the time. He'd say, "Hey, listen to this." Like, "Oh my God, that's amazing! Who's that?"
Yeah.
That's my band. That's because, like, what do you mean? Yeah, I was like, how? This is so awesome. How can you get into a situation that you're asked to create a fake band, which is an homage to the music that you grew up with? It's so meta. It's amazing.
It's crazy.
It is. And especially, like, I mean, I can paint it up in an even nicer picture, saying, you know, you're given this sort of grizzled old rock vet sort of shot at doing his album after all these years of slugging it out in the bars and in the clubs and riding his bike from doing sound gigs at 3 a.m. And all of a sudden the universe goes, hey, here, why don't you do this? You know? And again, I mean, I'm always going to be in debt to JF Zuga and whoever brought the idea up to him. Because I know he's often said somebody came up and said, hey, what if we did this? But, you know, JF's always been super creative, and I think he knows a good idea when he hears it, and he wasn't afraid to push for this. And like I said, you know, I've made the story up plenty of times. I've said it, but originally, like I figured, okay, I'm going to sing on it. And I, you know, in all my 30 years, like I've sang lead in bands, I've sang backups. I mean, you know, I'm comfortable either way, but I guess I've always sort of looked at not being the lead singer as like, well, I'm good. I can do it, but you know, there's probably somebody better. So with this in mind, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to write these songs. And again, you know, that's a whole huge production requirement of like, okay, when are you going to write this? You know, when are you going to do it? So making one of those executive smart decisions that you look back on and go, when you're looking in the mirror, you're going, that was freaking smart. Good on you, And I was like, hey, who do I know that I could work with? Because I remember talking to somebody and they're like, you're never going to be able to do that. Like, how much work that is? And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It is a lot of work, So then I thought, and I was like, oh, Johan. And because I knew,
of course,
like,
guardian
Johan
angel.
He's my guardian angel. And I was like, hey, what do you think about this? Because again, I mean, it's the perfect mix, right? The guy's got his own recording studio.
Mm-hmm.
He's a phenomenal musician, but that didn't mean that it was going to gel and work. Like we've never
might not even
worked
have the time.
together. No, we've never done anything musical together. So I was like, okay. And he was like, he was up for it. He's like, okay. I mean, he was brought in as an outsourced sort of guy. And so I said, okay, let's try it. So he sends me a couple of riffs, with drums and everything. And I listened to them and I'd go, okay, that one. And I'd say that one, there's something that speaks to me. So give me a week or two with that. And the first one we did was Space Riders with No Name. That was the first thing we ever worked on. And I had to obviously sell this to the production team that I could do it and that I wasn't just bullshitting and that, we could legitimately deliver something that the quality would be good enough. Because that was always my worry is, can we make it sound legit and not kind of cheesy and not kind of goofy. And so even like, it's funny, like, when I got the riffs from Johan and I had sat down with JF already and I said, okay, well, what do we want to write about? Like lyrically, I kind of need to know my sandbox because I said, obviously it's not going to be like a Motley Crue record where you're singing about, strippers and this and that. I mean, it's still Marvel and we want to, respect the Disney and the 14 and up and keep everything copacetic with all the people signing the checks and signing the legal documents. So we sat down together and we listed a bunch of topics and it was all stuff that I could easily relate to. I mean, as a guy who grew up sort of that classic, like, I wasn't cool. I was a misfit. I didn't fit in with any kind of clique. I just kind of walked around with my Walkman and tried to look cool with like my Motorhead jacket or whatever, but never fit in anywhere. So like the whole teenage thing to me, I went through it, as an outcast, kind of just your own little group of friends. But again, like that's pretty much rock and roll, right? Like I grew up biggest Kiss fan you'll ever meet, other than a few of my other friends that are even bigger Kiss fans. But one thing I'll say about Kiss is, you ever meet somebody who's a Kiss fan, you become buddies right away. And it's rare, but it's an amazing thing because I think the Kiss army and the people in that had to go through so much ridicule and stuff to be fans because people from everything would be like, if you didn't get Kiss, then they were a joke and they were clowns. But if you got it, you loved it and you were part of that family for life. So for me, I grew up on that and I found that music very empowering when I was, going through those rough years. Cause I'd read about, Paul Stanley was sort of this chubby kid who didn't really get popular and didn't fit in with anyone. I'm like, well, I can relate to that. And, so when JF and I sat down, it was all about, family, empowerment, standing up for yourself, believing in yourself. And I'm like, okay, well, that pretty much sums me up and what I consider important, So when we started writing, when I got the first thing, I had no idea how I was going to write. And I'm just like, I haven't written a song in quite a long time. But again, maybe the universe, there was a guardian angel there, but, suddenly you just start writing a few lines and you're like, here we come. Faster than the speed of light. Oh, that sounds cool. And and you're like, okay, now I need another line, and you're like, and that's literally, it's like chipping away at a stone. I mean, some of them came easier. And again, for that, like just that, I'll take you to the stars. I'll show you who we are. I don't know where I came up with that. Like, it was just, oh, this sounds cool, and you sing it and you're like, yeah, like I love that French expression, je crois. And you're like, I believe it, like right away, you're like, I get it. Yeah, it sounds right. And even like the whole Space Riders with No Name. I mean, again, it's a bit of a borrowing from The Man with No Name of Clint Eastwood. But again, I grew up on those Sergio Leone films. And so I thought, well, this is kind of cool. Like you're guys in space and you have no names. And, and I was just trying to paint an image And then when I let JF hear it, like again, you're watching like just God, I hope he likes it. I hope
Well,
he's
hold
not
on. Before you say this, full disclosure, people need to understand that when he played this for JF, JF didn't know that you were actually the singer in this.
No, he
So
didn't.
he
didn't know.
Sits down,
he didn't know what
creative
it
director.
was.
That's it. He knew what you were doing. You were building an experiment. All right. You were going to prove out that you could essentially assemble a track to give an example of what Star-Lord, this fictional band, would have sounded like. And so you sit him down in a room, probably just the two of you. He's going in with really no information. Like essentially, this is like live or die moment here. And he puts on the headphones. I still remember this story, but when you told me this, I was just full of smiles. It's such a good one. Go ahead. So he sits down, puts on the headphones.
No headphones on the speakers. So,
okay,
so
right, of course.
Really loud and punching.
Yeah.
And so I bring him in. I'm like, okay, we recorded a song. And I said, I'll let you hear it. And he goes, yeah, don't tell me anything. Just let me hear it. So I put it on and then he looks at me and he's like, man, it's effing great. It's freaking awesome. And he's like, and then he's like, who's singing? And I'm like, I am. And he looks at me like, he's like,
surprise.
He's like, that's you? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and I said, look, I got a few singers in mind that I might, reach out to. He's like, no. You're going to do it. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Inside, like I said, I was squealing like a little
sure.
boy, but then once all that smoke faded and you're like, okay, so now you got to do it. Big boy.
Yeah. Lucky you. Now you get to build an album and a game at the same time. Perfect.
Yeah. And just to show you from a funny point, how like when you were saying earlier, how things are always moving and changing. So for the longest time, the opening scene of the game with the farmhouse, and then you go and transition inside and he's got the music playing. It was always Space Riders with no name. And Jeff was like, I'd like us to do 10 songs. So I'm like, okay. And it was getting a little late. Like we were actually a year ago at this time. And I knew like the year I had ahead, I was like, okay, you got to bang out this song because you will not have any time to do any of this for the next. So this is it. And I was really having a hard time. Like I had the riff from Johan and I had one idea for the chorus. Like I knew I wanted that. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. The 0 to Hero with the whole, go, go, go. I knew that was a good hook and I wanted that sort of big crowd thing, but I had no idea. And honestly, like I was like, yeah, I'll get to it during the Christmas holidays. And Christmas holidays come and go, and Steve's still sitting there doodling on his pad, drawing, Kiss stuff and guitars and everything, but no lyrics. And I'm just like, okay. And that voice in your head, hey, it's getting a little late there, big boy. When are you gonna put the song back? And Jeff's like, like the art team needs to adapt the cassette jack. Like now it's actual, not like I want it, but there's actual production limitations and schedules that are saying we need this soon. And so I sit down, and again, I don't know how or where. I mean, who can ever say, where the muse comes from? But I just started writing again. I'm like, okay, from the time I was young, I knew this day would come. And I'm like, okay, you're telling a story. That's kind of cool. And then I'm like, oh, well, Mama, she said, son, you'll always be on the run. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Now we're getting a picture. Like you're on the run. We don't know what, but I'm interested, and I keep writing and
you make it sound so easy.
Yeah. Well, believe me, if you knew how many, like I said, it's literally like chiseling a rock.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes you're like, you're trying, you're like, okay, this is going to be the arm. It's going to look awesome. And he's going to be like this. And then you stand back and you're like, that's crap. Put some cement
doesn't
back
even look
on
like
this.
an arm.
Doesn't even look like an arm. Let's turn around the whole thing and try it from another angle. But
what you mentioned, Stevie, is super interesting because that's a situation that all professional creative are. I mean, sometimes you're inspired and motivated, and sometimes you're not, and you still have to deliver. And we're often asked, what when I'm not inspired or motivated, you just do it anyway. And it's going to suck for a period of time, and it's going to gradually suck a little bit less, and eventually there'll be like one little nugget of, oh, that's interesting, and then it's going to go in that direction. And
you're right.
And yeah, the floodgates are going to start. So it's just to avoid the analysis paralysis moment in the beginning, and just go. It's going to suck just know ahead of time it's going to suck a little bit, and eventually you'll find something. It might take 10 minutes, might take 3 hours, might take 2 days, but just Just
Yeah.
do it. Just move on.
I think, and you're totally right. And I think sometimes it's that, you know, certain songs, I'll almost compare it to, like, you know, that great analogy people make about women who've gone through labor, and there's something in their brains that kind of erases how painful and frustratingly stressful it all is,
Yep.
because they would
That
never
has to be
do it
true.
again.
No,
And it's
exactly.
the same way. Like, I'd look back at a song and I'm like, oh, it's such a great song. Like, you know, okay, I'm gonna write another one. And then like a month later, you're like, I write
Oh yeah,
crap.
just kind
I
of.
can't write anything good. And like I'm literally like taking the dogs out at night with the song on, and I'm walking for 45 minutes with the song on loop. I'm singing out loud on the street. I'm like, I'm just like you said, Dave. I'm looking for that nugget. I'm waiting for that lightning to hit. And when that lightning hits, you're like, okay, I know it. I don't have the
Yeah.
full lightning in the jar yet, but I have the spark. And with that spark, I have enough
Yeah.
light to know where I want to go. And
And sometimes
sometimes
it's
it just
sometimes it's the opposite. You kind of take it for granted, and you're super inspired, and it goes well, and you're like, oh, it's easy. Okay, I can take a break. I'll
that's
continue
it.
tomorrow. No,
And then
just keep riding this wave because you have
that's
no
it.
idea when it's going to come back.
That's it. It's exactly it. It's funny, like you bring that up, and it makes me think of in Nowhere. And again, this is where Brent and I got to work together with the lipless scene. So I don't know, Brent, if you finally got to see it in game.
Actually, I did. It was because we had Daryl and
Right.
and Seb. I didn't even know it was in the game, and so they
Okay,
they
that's right.
popped
That's
out
right.
on
I
me at the beginning. Yeah.
watched it. Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
right.
like, I had no idea. That's really funny. This is a test that we had done a long time ago, just to sort of like, you know, a bunch of us, like Steve, myself, and well, like Steve as in you, and like there was a bunch of us that got together and was like, let's just take a crack at it and see what happens, because we kind of sort of like what you're saying, like we need to know, we're looking for inspiration, and we just, instead of, you know, we created our own inspiration by just bringing some talented actors that we had already casted, and we had a really great scene written up by the narrative team, and we just tried it just to see. And it was amazing how much momentum that kind of created.
And it was so much fun. I mean, that's one thing
Yeah,
I'll always say.
that was fun.
Working with you, Brent, was always like a highlight of the day, because I knew it was going to be like fast, creative, like the jokes, the ideas, everything. And that's a great way to spend your day. I mean, there's nothing better than when you get to work with people you respect, and people that kind of push you to be better. And you were always one of those people, I felt, when I worked with. So it was a lot of fun. Dave, same with you. Like, we always had great interactions with the cut scenes, and I always respected, like, I could always see, like, you definitely took audio. Like, it wasn't just like, okay, the images are good, and you know, it was like you would sit there and you'd be like, okay, so what do you have in mind? And I was thinking this. So it's cool when people care about stuff. I mean, of course, on one side, it's easy to go like, hey, like, why are these people all in my yard? You know, like, I want to do this. But if you get past that and you say, well, respect these people, they have really good ideas too, and they might be able to make you look better. And that's how I've always gone about it. I don't really care who comes up with the idea. As long as it's great and we all put our names on it, then we all win, right?
Yeah.
So that's the best approach.
It comes back to what you mentioned in the beginning of, you know, getting to work with people you gradually become comfortable with. Because in the beginning, there's a calibration of, okay, how much gray zone can we collaborate instead of just I'm here, you're over there. There's definitely some calibration needed, but when you find a spot that you're like, okay, now I'm comfortable to bring this idea, and you know, each idea are going to build on top of each other, and the end result is going to be none of our mutual original idea, but ideally it's going to be better than what we both had in
great
mind.
example of that is the moment in the game where they're doing the bet and they're talking about getting money and who do we sell, Rocket or Groot. And when it comes out of that scene, it goes from the radio sort of being, you know, non-diegetic in the background, sort of playing, and then all of a sudden it becomes full stereo when we cut out of the ship, right? And that was something Daryl and I, just from sitting together, and I'm like, well, I really want to get this music, but I'm like, I want the music to hit as we come out and we shoot. Now it's like in the movie, you know, like full stereo, and that's the hook. And Daryl's like, yeah, I love it, you know. And funny enough, like, we didn't get to spend as much time collaborating as we would have liked, just because of the workload and COVID,
so
obviously, and everything.
But
I always took that as, like, once we pulled that off and I saw it, I was like, okay, that's the recipe I'm going to use often in the game. And I often would, where I would either start out in space full music stereo. And as we transitioned to the ship, I would now push it so it's coming from the radio, and it would transition perfectly, you know. Again, with the help of Richard, who's scoring stuff to make those transitions happen, the audio team that are doing all the magic under the hood to make all these ideas work. So again, huge team effort, but it was great that time that Daryl and I worked on that, and we sort of set the example. And where I was going before was with the lipless thing. That stayed around till probably June of like last year, where I still didn't know musically what I was going to do with that scene, because I remembered what we had done in the first playable. I took kind of the idea of like, you know, the guys banging on the table, and I'm like, well, that still works. Jeff really liked that. But I was like, what's the score? Because you go into the club and there's like this, you know, busy sort of techno track going, and you got all these aliens, and I wanted it to feel a bit like, you know, Mos Eisley, but a bit more dangerous. And then all of a sudden, like, the music stops and you have this guy with the gun. And I was,
that's it.
Honestly, I remember coming down here in the room, in my studio here on a Friday night, where I remember, you know, it was during the summertime, and I think my wife had fallen asleep early on the couch or something, 10 o'clock. And she saw me coming downstairs, and she's like, where are you going? And I'm like, I'm going to go work for a bit. I was just kind of restless. And she's like, you know, 10:30 on a Friday. You're going to go work? You didn't work enough already this week? And I said, this is actually like fun, creative stuff that I don't have time to do during the week. And I'm sure you guys can relate. Like, there becomes a point where you get into production, and like you said, being at the end of the chain, there's still pieces that move. And sometimes you just don't have that time to sit back and go like, you know, let me look at this moving piece from 12 different angles and come up with the best. It's just like, you know what, this isn't as important as this. So this, we're just going to do it this way. It's going to work. Nobody's going to complain, because I need to give the love to this. You know, you have to prioritize. So with that scene, I can remember I came down here on a Friday night, and I was just sitting here, and I'm like, you know, what am I going to do with this? You know, like, it's such a weird, because the score just didn't feel right. So I started researching, and I think the epiphany for me was like, okay, this is a Western. This is just a Western. It's in a bar. It's a guy standing at a bar with the gun at the back of the head. And, you know, you should have killed me when you had the chance. You know, it's like, it's basically one of these scenes, right? So I'm like, okay. So I start researching on YouTube, and I'm going through Westerns like Unforgiven and, you know, all the Sergio Leone stuff. And I'm finding scenes like this. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, there's your answer. Score it like a Western. I'm like, that might just work. So all of a sudden I go into my head. I'm like, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, Brian Setzer, great score, very Mexican sounding, very Western. I look it up. I find the track I want. I capture the scene. I bring it in. I put the music underneath, and I'm like, oh man, this works. And I'm like, this is funny. Like, it's basically going, this scene is completely over the top, ridiculous. And I'm going to go, I'm doubling down on the ridiculous.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
As opposed to, I'm going to try and make this, you know, pull it back into a more, I was like, no. We're going full crazy on this. So now you get the moment where, you know, Peter's talking and you hear the gun, and he's like, you hear the click, click, and you get this great Spanish flamenco chord with the bell ringing. Exactly. And that whole beginning gets scored with that sort of mix. And I fell in love with it. And I was up till like 3 a.m. like working on it. And then I finally looked, and I'm like, oh my God, it's 3. You got to get to bed. So I go to bed. And it's funny, in the morning, like, I remember my wife's up, and she's like, you know, I'm still laying in there at 10:30 or something. And she's like, you know, what time did you go to bed? And I'm like, 3 o'clock. So, and I'm like, but you know what? And I'm like mumbling gibberish. I'm like, hey, it's a great idea. The lipless has a Western, a Mexican bar. It's going to be awesome. You know, like I'm back, and she's like, what? You know, and I was so excited. And I got up that day. I'm like, I need someone else's opinion. So I showed it to her, and she's like, yeah, it's great. So then I reach out to my composer, and I'm like, what do you think of this? Tell me if you would be up for this. And I mean, again, huge compliment to Rich, but he's never turned me any of my ideas away where he'd be like, I love it. That's cool. Let's do it. You know? Then it was like, okay, I said, before we do anything, I need to show this to the creative core. So on our meeting, I'm like, okay, everybody, I just want to show you something. You tell me if there's any flags. If not, this is what I'm doing. And I knew it was crazy enough that I had to get, you know, buy-in before starting to pour the concrete, because you just don't do that. So I played it for them, and I'm watching the reactions, and I just see everybody laughing. And as soon as I come back, like I think Daryl had like tears running down. He's like, "Oh my god, it's so awesome!" And everybody's like, "It's really funny. It's really good." And I was like, "All right, I got everybody laughing, everybody smiling." I mean, I've said it before, right? We're in the business of trying to put smiles on people's faces. I mean, somebody lays down their money, you want them to walk away, whether it's a concert, whether it's a movie, whether it's a game, you want that person to go, man, I got my money's worth and then some, you know? And I think that's the attitude that Eidos, our team on this project, I think we all bought into that attitude. You know, we all really wanted, you know, when you're getting to put your name, I said it at one of our team meetings. I remember Daryl got up and we had presented stuff on a stage at one of those theaters that the company had rented out. And I remember, you know, he spoke from the heart, and it really inspired me. And when I got up and gave my speech, like sort of to present music or something, and I just said to everybody, you know, really from the heart, like, we're getting to attach our name to a freaking Marvel title. Like, let's just leave it all on the ice, man. Like, let's give it everything we got. You know, this is an opportunity of a lifetime, you know, and you want to be able to look back on that going, I killed it, you know, as opposed to, you know, yeah, next one.
Yeah.
You know? So, and I'm not saying because of my speech or because of Daryl's speech, because I think the wheels were already in that, they were already aligned in that way. But everybody, like I said, I just felt that everybody really upped their game on this title. It could just be the stars aligned and you know, everything fell into place. I'm sure that's part of it. But yeah, it's a good team, and everybody did an amazing job on it from you know, the smallest, you know, whether it's a tester or whatever, like everybody really cared.
Yeah. I think Guardian was definitely their biggest surprise. I don't think there's a lot of. Well, first of all, the game was announced very late, like literally just a couple of months before the release, instead of like 1 year ahead
Came
of
out
time.
of nowhere.
And you know, there's always this bias of, well, okay, it's a game from a movie franchise and all that, so it might not be as good. But I mean, it's definitely a very special game, and it gets the proper recognition it deserves. So that's amazing.
Well, I appreciate that, and like I said, I'll happily accept the compliment on behalf of the team, but definitely a team effort. You know, from everyone. Like I said, yeah. I feel like I should talk a bit about our trip to London, which was pretty interesting. We had to travel. We had to travel during COVID, so that was fun.
Yeah.
Well, we got about 15 minutes late. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we have 2 or 3 questions, so maybe we
do
through those, and then maybe at the end we have time for one last.
Yeah, exactly.
One last
story.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we get some of these questions out. Let's see here.
Sure.
I'm scrolling up here. There was one that came in early. I'm looking for it. All right, here. I found it. This one's from Sound Symmetry Studio.
Ah, yes.
Hold on a second. It's a little long, so I can't. Let me read it first. I'll bring it up. So the question is: at which point of the game's process did you have new requirements from the PS5, and did it change anything in the audio production? I guess besides the loading speed.
Yeah, great question. It came a little bit late. Probably came during 2021, early on, like early in the year. I mean, again. I'm just trying to think of the best diplomatic way of saying it, but you know, we're putting out fires. Like, it's basically like we're in the middle of a blazing inferno at this point. We're trying to like just manage everything and get it all out, right? So, you know, the sort of hey, you know, the PS5 will allow you to do this. You're like, yeah, you're like, you know, when the sound isn't breaking, I'll get to that, you know.
Yeah.
But honestly, we got to it a bit late, but we knew we had already done some of the research, and we had already sort of had our list of what we would need to support. So I would say early on in the year, and again, a lot of credit goes to our audio programmer, Simon Pelser, who had basically gone through all the spec sheets, and he was the core point dealing with Sony. So he came back and kind of told us what he felt we could support. So one of the main things was, you know, obviously the speaker inside the manette, the controller. So you get all like briefers coming out through that. And I think other than that, I mean, if I would have had JS here, our technical director, he might have been able to go on a bit longer. Other than that, it was one thing that came in a bit late, maybe not even related, but just we changed on the patches, the music that plays when you hover over the Marvel icon. Originally, it was just sort of a little bit of score that we had put in. And then marketing was like, like we got this great opportunity to kind of distance ourselves from other games by using like this Star-Lord stuff. And we have all the tracks without vocals. So we took a bit of the power ballad Ghost and we updated it in one of the day one patches so that when you hover over it, you get a nice instrumental of Ghost. And I got to admit, like when I go on the PlayStation, I just started playing the game. I got a PS5 for the family at Christmas. So my wife started playing it and I'm watching her. And I have to say, like, shout out to the marketing guys. It does make a difference. Like when you have all those games and you go over one and you hear another one. And we had done our research at the time and we felt like something just subdued in background. And they came the other way where they're like, no, like, let's, be bold and wave our flag. And I was like, okay. And now that I hear it, it's great. Like you have the song just in loop in the background and it fits really well. So I hope that someone answered it.
Speaking of changes, you guys also had a pretty big technological change, like with Engine at some point as well, too, didn't you? In the middle of the production, I thought you did. No, huh?
No, I think we were on the set. Like for us, we're working in an audio engine that just piggybacks on the game engine.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, you guys are using Wise probably, right? Yeah.
Unless maybe it did, and I just don't remember it. To be honest, like I said, maybe it's. Like
I thought I heard something.
I remember certain things.
I got another question here from Flame Cherry. That's a really good handle. What were your emotions when your soundtrack won almost all of the awards? How did your family react to this contribution for the to the gaming industry?
Oh, that's cool. I mean, every time we win anything, it's a huge honor, and I'm honestly, it's not to say I'm not happy, but I'm more happy for people like Richard and the work that Randy did. But I know how hard Richard worked. I was there every step of the way. I mean, I know how hard I worked, but I guess it's just the I don't know. I mean, Dave, you can probably relate, as a leader or whatever of a team, you hate to kind of put yourself up front. You basically want to push everybody around you and step back. And so I'm happy to do that. I mean, I know how much I put into this game, but I also know the people around me did just as much. And, I want to make sure that I'm happy for everybody when we win anything, and if we win an audio award or whatever, it's the game to me that's winning it. It's not us.
Yeah.
It's good for the game. So good for the game, good for the studio, good for everyone. Team effort, as Richard just said in the chat. Where to go, Rich?
Well, I mean, it's funny because like audio is always, I think that people often say that audio is at least 50% of your experience in, anything audio visual. And so, we didn't really get much into all the work that your team needs to do because we spent most of the time touching on the music, but there's the whole component of characterization and voice and all these other very, very big parts of the job.
I didn't even talk about. Yeah, I feel like you got to give me a minute. I got to mention somebody here. So
go for it.
For all the aliens in the game, again, like we could have just said, hey, we'll get some, blah, 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 and just some weird sort of sounds from people. And we'll treat it as a secondary sort of thing. But I didn't want to do that with anything, I mean, you always want to, even the sound of the fly in the background, if you're a perfectionist, you want it to be the best, most realistic fly buzzing in the, you know what I mean? It's that stupid, but I'm sure you guys get it, Yeah. So for the aliens and I was sort of like, okay, I really want that authenticity of like, from what I've seen in Star Wars or any sci-fi that you watch, with Mandalorian, whatever. And I hooked up with a local Montreal guy, Sébastien Croteau, who's part of La Fabrique des Monstres, which is basically a group of Montreal death metal singers that come together and they do, whether it's, they do some really interesting stuff. Like if you've never seen it, I loved, there's a YouTube link called Growler's Choir. And it's basically a poetry reading with them backing the reader. And if you can picture something very sort of Game of Thrones where like there's a guy reading, and then all of a sudden you have all these big voices with that guttural, and it's like, oh, ah, and all in sync though, and there's a director doing it all, and it's very powerful. Like I saw it and I was like, wow, this is so
We need
cool.
that.
Yeah. So, and Sebastien is now gone global. He's connected with metal singers, death metal singers all over the world. So I actually brought him in like probably close to a year before we even recorded. And we started working together and talking about Nowhere. And I was sending him the list of aliens and the list of creatures. So Sebastien, he would send me all kinds of stuff, references. Like, it's amazing. Like, this guy goes deep. Like, he creates like a 200-page Bible of all the science fiction films and how they can lend themselves to our game and whatever. Really, really, really passionate guy. And through him and sending me like all the demos, okay, what do you think of this? And I'm like, well, not this, but, and then I'd be like, okay, in Pitch Black, they have a creature, you see it once and it's cool, and I want it more in that direction. He's like, okay, I got it, So then once we had the design down, which, like I said, took about a year, he met with all his team and he decided, okay, well, who can do this? Because now I'm like, okay, well, I need 3 of these, 2 of these, 3 of these. And again, from like a spreadsheet point, you're like, okay, well, which speak English, which speak alien, and which ones are going to get localized. And I'm trying to pitch like, well, if the more alien we go, the less we have to localize it. I want ours to be across the world. So back and forth with narrative and everything, we get the numbers down. I get the whole spreadsheet. Seb does it. He gets everybody together, and then we started recording them, and it was really, really cool. I mean, they came in and they really lent themselves to it. They really gave. We had a few big names. We had the singer from Arch Enemy, Elisa.
Oh, yeah.
She's from Montreal, and she was in town,
Wow.
and she came in and she did.
That's cool.
Yeah, she's actually the food vendor in Nowhere, and there's a couple of other characters. But what's great, all these actors, like right when we'd be done, I'd be like, okay, there's 5 minutes. Just give me anything crazy that you can do. And then I would grab all of those after the sessions and put them in a folder on the network. And I would tell the audio team, for all the ambiances, go here. There's tons of crazy sounds. And even myself, like as late as September, and we were like cut in October, the scene in Lady Hellbender's castle where you see Star-Lord and you just see the tentacle and he's kissing the tentacle. He's like, I'll call you.
Yeah, I love that scene.
And it's a great scene, but more and more I was like, it needs something. And I'm like, you need to hear the alien reciprocating to what he's saying.
Somehow.
Otherwise it feels static. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I need something, So I start going through that folder and I'm like just listening to like the craziest sounds you've ever heard. And then finally I find one, and funny enough, it was Elisa showing us an exercise she did, gargling with water to warm up. And it's this weird, like gargling wet, like, and I'm like, that's it. So I put the sound out, and now I poke JS, who's got like all these performance issues, and I'm like, hey, stop everything you're doing, because I want this sound to go in. He's looking at me like, you're kidding me, right? Like, I got Rome burning behind me, and you want me to stop, and and I'm like,
yes, we're cutting the discs like tonight. You got put
I'm
this
like, but please. And to his credit, I mean, he got it in, and
that's awesome.
And I loved it. I was just like, that's great. It's perfect now,
It's crazy. Like, I mean, there's a big theme here on collaboration. We often have that with a lot of the guests that we bring in. And that probably has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of people we bring in, we have past experiences with that have been very collaborative. And it just goes to show you, like, all these things, like, if you find yourself working on a game, or especially a game, because I think there's a little bit more access when you're working on a game, like, definitely spend some time and energy collaborating with those other departments, the character design team, the audio design team. Because take a look, even that Lipless thing. Lipless got his nickname because there was a concept. We were just working with whatever we had lying around. That was just like an NPC enemy that was in the game. We're like, we need somebody for the scene, so we went and looked through stuff. And then what happened was we liked this one. We thought it was really cool, so we were like, let's run with that. So when the actor came on and he took a look at that concept, he was inspired. He's like, I'm going to try to sound like that, which makes sense, right? And great so actor. That literally just
Alex Ivanovici.
Exactly. And so he ended up like talking. He was acting the entire time with his lips stuck up like this. Because he wanted to sound like, so he wasn't able to make certain phonemes because his lips were missing.
Yeah, he can't make a P sound because he doesn't
That's
have
it.
lips. So he always says,
That's it.
eat that, eat that.
That's it. That's it. And it became a
but
thing. And like suddenly a character was born just through this sort of interesting collaboration between a character designer, an audio department, and some actors. And like, it was
narrative
just
team,
fun. Like that.
Yeah.
That's where magic happens, right? When you have all these minds that have different perspectives on the things, and it can just give birth to a spark that can lead to an inferno. If you're, like going back to what you're saying before,
open to it.
Cosmic energies are useless if you're not open to them, right? You have to kind of go with the flow. So collaboration is key. That's how cool things like that happen. I just wanted to make sure
I agree.
that point was
I agree
made
completely. And it's the funnest part of the job. I mean, it's to me,
it is.
Again,
to me, it is too.
It equates
Absolutely.
to being it equates to being in a band in a jam room, which I always go back to, because when people start collaborating and like you said, like the Beatles, Get Back. I mean, you watch that and you see all the sparks. You could almost see it in the air. Oh, you're going to play that? I think this will go good with that. And he starts
exactly.
And everybody starts just feeding off of it.
That's it. Truly creative brainstorming.
It's a magic moment, and when it happens, like you said, you need to acknowledge that it's happening and grab it and ride it until it kicks you off and goes to the
absolutely, because you don't know when it's going to come again, right? Like those things are
never know.
It's like, so we got very little time left, but I wanted to squeeze in a couple of last questions if you don't mind, Steve.
No, absolutely.
There's one here by our very own. No. This has been great. This is like when people come to these chats because they just want to get a good dose of the kind of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So we got one here from this is from Scott Hewitt, actually, our community manager. He said, Steve, any tips for people wanting to get into scoring film and games? And I get people asking me this a lot too. A lot of my musically inclined friends. So this is a really good question. I'm interested to hear what you say.
So, I mean, I wish I had Richard here because he would probably give you the real answer, as he does it for a living. Whereas I get paid to watch people do it for a living. But what I would say is, the question was for scoring, right?
Yeah, specifically. Yes. Yeah.
So what I would recommend, and again, maybe Rich will come back and chime in the chat if he's here.
Yeah, please do, Richard. If you're still here.
I would say is start practicing by grabbing some of your favorite scenes in movies or in games and scoring them, and start developing, and don't always pick the same type of thing. Like pick an action scene, because somebody gives you like the best emotional scene in the world and you're like, oh my God, I'm weeping listening to this. And then everything else is flat. You're not really winning, right? You need to have everything. You need to have everything covered. And that was like when I asked for the pitch from the composers, I'm like, well, give me a combat. I want a heroic theme. I want, I had a list of about 6 or 7 things that were very important because I already had an idea of using themes a lot the way Star Wars does, where you get that theme served to you so many ways, like the big theme. And then when Luke's looking at the 2 sons and you get that sort of string melancholy version, I love that. And that's what I wanted us to do. And Rich was like, totally on board. Great idea. So we use that a lot. So again, I would focus a lot on scores and I would practice. It's practice, right? And when you're going to send people stuff, like send them a scene that you've rescored. I mean, just maybe don't pick like something iconic like Jaws with Dana, like pick, because you're not going to change people's opinion on that iconic score, but pick any kind of scene from a game or a movie and score it and have that in your demo. It's a good way to show people what you can do. And again, it shows people that you can take a visual property and put the emotion to it, to what's there. You know what I mean? Because I could just sit here and write anything if there's no visual that I have to follow, a camera cut or a timing thing. And I mean, that's one thing, like, Dave, I'll be honest, like I find I learned so much on this project about paying so much more attention now to like camera cuts and this and Richard chimed in. So
nice.
Agreed with Steve, have your own musical voice. Don't try to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. There you go. Be different. Take creative risks, absorb yourself in anything that inspires you and say goodbye to your social life. That's a great answer. But yeah, he's totally right. I think that's the way you have to do it is you just got to get in, roll up your sleeves and whether it's playing guitar, whether it's anything, it's just practice and do it until you find your voice and who you are. I mean, it's taken me, I've been playing guitar for 30 years And I know I'm never going to be a Steve Vai. That's just not my type of playing. It's not who I am. It's not natural to me to play that way. Doesn't mean I'm not a great player. I mean, like, I can listen to Angus Young as much as I listen to Steve Vai. Steve Vai technically way better than Angus Young, but people love listening to Angus Young. So, it's just about finding who you are. You don't have to be the best at this or that. Just be the best you.
That's it.
I think that's it. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Like as Richard says, be different. Like own it. Be you, because you are different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like that's what people are going to be interested in, rather than just being a copy of somebody else. It's interesting that way you put it too, like the idea of taking an existing sort of set of scenes or a sequence and then scoring it, because that's kind of like, that's more of a job, right? Often that's what you would need to be doing. So rather than starting from scratch and trying to create everything, like start with something. It's because it's very similar to animators do, right? We often practice by taking like a piece of audio from an existing film, and it's a very classic exercise and competition that animators are always doing, where they take it and then they bring it to life. There's already a performance there, there's already a theme, and there's already a feeling there. Your job is to pick up on that and double down and complete it, which is exactly what you kind of need to do when you're scoring, probably, right? You got to build that spectrum of audio that fits that piece.
And like you said,
I don't even know where to.
I'm sure many people can just sit there and write a random piece with no visual to time it to. But as you said, being given a dramatic, emotional scene, like look how great that scene with Drax and Star-Lord in Nowhere at the Rift is resonating, from the writing, the facial animation, which is just sick how good it is. There's so many good things, and I don't want to sound crappy on this, but there's so many amazing elements in that scene that what often gets overlooked is how good the score is in that part, because it's very powerful, and it's not a negative. It's me actually saying there's so many good things that I totally get why the score doesn't get mentioned. Yeah. But again, as you said, the score is basically what's taking all of that in its arms.
It's wrapping it
and wrapping it.
Exactly.
And Richard, when he wrote that score, like, I was like, this is your moment. When I gave him that scene, I'm like, get out all the tools you have to make people weep. Like this is one of the big moments. And he got it. Weep. And when he wrote the score, and it stuck with me. I was like, God, it was so good, so good. And then when we got to one of the next Guardians having their big moments, and I was going to ask, like, I got to prepare the list of music for that chapter. And I was like, okay, like, I'm writing something like the other one, but different. And then I'm like, are you really going to write that? Like, you're going to have to punch yourself if you write that, because I hate that line. Like, give me the same, but different. Like, I want it blue, but bluer, like, no. So
reinvent blue.
I thought about it, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm like, you and Rich have talked about themes, and I'm like, why don't we just reuse this? And this becomes a theme that every time one of them has one of those big character awakening moments, we come back to this. We don't have to write this and then 4 cheaper versions of this, because let's be honest, right? Once you get that first one, everything else is like a pale copy. I'm like, let's double down on this. And Rich was like, I love it. And I said, plus it saves in scoring time, and we can move on to the next stuff.
Exactly. Those are the best ideas, right?
There's already over 5 hours of music. At some point, you can't score everything. But it turned out, again, to be one of those sort of cosmic decisions that when we sat back and played the game, we're like, it works perfect. And it became what we called our theme of loss, which we used whenever one of those characters, even at the end of the game, when Peter wakes up, when he's on the table, I mean, it's that theme that's playing. We use it as much as we could.
Yeah, I feel like people who write really good scores are in the same category of really good compositing artists for films, right? It's like you don't notice if it's good often. You just notice when something's not working. It's like, because when it's good, it just fits and it completes everything. And it's like you're the unsung heroes. It's funny too. Another thing that didn't come up in this chat that I wish we had more time, but I'll mention it really briefly, is that the thing is, like, when Steve described like how chaotic productions can be and how there's always moving parts, the thing about the audio department is that they are often at the caboose end of that train. There's a train that's like full steam ahead, plowing forward, and everyone in those departments, every one of those carts in front of that caboose are making changes that are important for protecting the quality of their work. And then at the end of the day, all those changes, they compound into what I can only describe as a fucking complete clusterfuck. And that audio now now has to like take and then like get out the door and then like make it sound good. I honestly, like, full props. I just wanted to take a moment to give full and absolute props to every audio designer and any audio developer in any game, because I see what you go through on every single freaking production I've been on, and I don't know how you hold it together, to be honest. And forget about making it sound as good as you did, especially on this particular game.
I'm bringing Brent to my next salary negotiation.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
And I'm going to say one thing, because I didn't get to talk about it because I just babbled too much, and I could sit here and talk for a while. But one big thing that we did, and for anybody listening on a production side, was put money and time into a mix. And it's something I learned from Rob Bridget on Tomb Raider, who's been a great support guy for me in the studio. And it's great having another audio director that you get along and we can support each other. And he's been great for that. And he was like, get a budget, get a schedule, and like, put it in. Cause like I picked his brain about Tomb Raider, and I was like, it went so well, and what went well, what didn't, what advice could you give me? And again, like, be open to learning from other people. So what the mix did was a few things. Number one, it did give me a card to play to say, hey, I'm going to England on this date. We can't keep changing after this date. And audio rarely gets that card, but now the studio's backing that card because they're paying for that studio time in London.
Yep.
Now, unless you want that studio time to be a waste of time, that's, it's your money.
That's
but,
that's a good way to do it. Make sure that's, it's smart.
So, and the other thing I'll say is our game, and again, a big credit goes to, JS Leblanc for pulling it all together while we were there. But, him and I had to go down there. We had to leave our families for over 3 weeks in August. I didn't see any of August. I was over in London. We had to go through like crazy amount of COVID tests. And just to be fair, the company like didn't force us to go. Like they were more than willing to say, if you guys don't want to go, like, we'll adapt. And I even had a backup plan if we stayed in Montreal. But JS and I knew the right place to go was to go to Montreal. We went in the UK, Montreal Studios, amazing facility, treated us like gold. Like just to show you, okay, like we arrive on the Friday at the hotel, and we had to quarantine for 5 days at the hotel. Quarantine.
That would have been fun.
Yeah, we never left the hotel, I swear. But anyway, no, we stayed in the hotel. We were really good. But these guys come to visit us on our first day with like this huge care package of like, here's some beers, here's some cool reading material about all the rock and roll spots in London. Here's some like, amazing. You start off your first day going like, this is going to be good. Yeah, exactly. And then they're like, come see the facility. The hotel was literally maybe a 2-minute walk to the facility.
Oh, it's amazing.
Like we crossed the street, walked through Soho, and we were there. So like there was nights at like 10:30, I'd go back to the room to grab a few beers out of the fridge to go back to work with JS till like midnight. And it was great because, if you had to hop into an Uber or something, forget it. And the other thing we did that was smart is, technology changes so much. Every 5 years we put out one game. But from Human Revolution, which was pure stereo, nothing else, to then Mankind Divided, which had, a bit more of a 5.1, but it's the engine that's kind of tricking it all, and everything else. And I think all the cutscenes were Bink. So I think they were all stereo. Mm-hmm. But now we get to this game where now you're talking like full 7.1 Atmos.
Like Dolby Atmos?
Everything.
Yeah,
Atmos. And we were like, I just sat there and I said, look, like I have good ears. Jazz has good ears, but we don't mix games for a living. We do this once every 5 years. And then when we do, it's in this chaotic rush, right? So I said, I want to surround ourselves with an expert. So with Molinare, we had so many meetings leading up to this to make sure everything was in place. And I said, I need an experienced guy. And we got to work with this guy, Richard Pryke, who's an Oscar-winning sound mixer for Slumdog Millionaire.
Oh, nice.
And what a gentleman. Like sitting with this guy every day. He was there every day, Monday to Friday. We were in on weekends as well. But I learned so much. And JS was here, he would say the same thing. Because I remember like we didn't really mix the game up until it was time to mix it because we had other stuff to do. And we didn't even have the full score in. So why would you mix it? Because at one point we're changing the MIDI for the real orchestra, which changes the dynamics of the audio completely. So basically we get out there and, we got all this COVID stress. You're not seeing your family. and even internally, like some of the guys are like, are you guys going to mix this? Because right now it's sounding kind of flat. And we're like, yeah, we know, but we're getting to it. So there's a lot of stress and insecurity. And then we get there and I know in my head how I want it to sound, like I have a good idea. So it's funny. The first day we're sitting there, and even then, I don't know this mixer guy, and I don't know where he's gonna take us. So I'm like,
no idea.
Please, God, let everything work out. So one of the first scenes we get, and it's the music when they're flying off into the quarantine zone, and he's like, "All right, JS," he's like, "Put it up 6 dB." So in audio, 6 dB is basically doubling the current sound. So he's basically saying to JS, like, if you're at 5, put it to 10, and JS is like, what?
Okay.
Like, is this guy for real?
This guy's crazy.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there going, like, I'm like, yes, like, let's go big, epic. Like, I want, turn it up with the hair back here.
Yeah.
And sure enough, we start doing it, and we go through the whole first chapter, and it's like painful because everything's like, turn this up, bring that up. But this guy knows his shit. And at the end, when we sat back and we played it, and now all of a sudden we had a dynamic mix where like the big moments were big.
That's it.
And we learned that, even though they give you specs saying, well, you should always respect like -22 as your average. Okay. But that doesn't mean you can't go to like -12 and go huge at this explosion. As long as you come back and average out so that you're not, because if you're too loud all the time, it's ear fatigue and it doesn't work.
For sure.
11 stops being 11 if you're at 10 all the time.
Yeah.
You have to come down to 5 for 11 to be allowed to be 11. So
absolutely.
The mix, I can't stress enough. Like, I'll be honest, I really feel the game found its audio identity in those 3 weeks in London.
Oh, that's cool.
That I look back at so fondly. Like, it was so stressful. Like I said, like just rush. And in the process, I got to deal with all this paperwork and get COVID tests and this. And you're just like, so much unknown. And yet we went out there and honestly, like, it sounds dramatic, but we came back as champions. Like, we really, like, when we came back, I was completely drained, and we came back on a Saturday, and then I was like, oh, but there's still 5 weeks left. So Monday, 9 a.m., you're back sitting here, after going through that. And I'll be honest, the tank was empty, but you find something to keep you going for 4 more weeks. But the game really like owes a huge debt to the UK, to Molinare. And like I said, I look fondly just with the 3 weeks JS and I spent going to war, like day in and day out. That's all we did. Go to the studio, stay there till late, go home, and then I'd get back to the hotel and I'd have marketing stuff and trailers to approve. And it'd be like 1 a.m. and I'd be going to bed, and I'm like, all right, do it all again tomorrow.
Like you said, hopefully that drug was released in your brains, because otherwise you wouldn't want to do it again, right? Sort of like,
exactly. And I already said to the guys, okay, we'll be back in 4 years.
Yeah, that's it.
But honestly, for any audio people, put a mix in your schedule and surround yourself with the right people, because it's worth it.
Sage advice. Steve, I'd like to take this moment to thank you for taking the time out of your day to chat with us.
That was great.
It was selfish of me because I get to get caught up with you, but hopefully everyone got a good earful of all this world that we know exists, that many of us don't necessarily really understand. This whole audio scape that you and your compatriots tirelessly, chore over to make as awesome as you guys are able to do. So thank you for giving us a little window into that world.
Thanks for having an audio guy on the program. I know it's mainly an animation sort of community.
We like to mix it up a little bit. Actually, I got a lot of people in chat. They were like, I'm an animator, but I find this conversation fascinating. I think,
let's do more of that.
That's it. Absolutely. So thank you for bringing something fresh to the table.
I haven't seen either of you in quite a while, so I could have sat here for another 2 hours and just talked. Like, you're both two great human beings, so it's fun to sit with you guys and talk. And again, cheers to you guys in the community for doing this.
Yeah, let's absolutely do that again.
Yeah, you kind of screwed yourself there, Steve, because whenever a guest says that they really liked it and they could talk for hours, we always bring them back. So now you're kind of on the hook. So
anytime anyone wants to listen to me talk, I will be happy. I never say no to a captive audience.
Good. I like it. Like a true rock star.
Thank you. All right. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone who supported and grabbed the game and played it. We really appreciate it. And for the album as well. I mean, Zero to Hero is now over 800,000 streams on Spotify.
That's awesome.
Wow.
That's so
Congrats.
awesome.
That's
On
amazing.
fire. Nice work, buddy.
Crazy.
Enjoy
It's crazy.
enjoy basking in the glory of that success, my friend. And well deserved.
Well, again,
All right.
team effort, and
Absolutely.
make sure it's well known that there was a lot of hands pulling together to get this boat over the harbor.
Absolutely. Cheers.
You guys be
All right,
well.
Steve. Cheers.
Happy New Year. and
You too.
All the best.
Yep.
Cheers.
Take care,
You will.
Steve. Speak soon.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye. Well, that was fun. I didn't got a chance to catch up with Steve for quite a while. I know I maybe poked each other on Facebook a couple times since I left that production, and it's amazing to see how much was done between. I always find that interesting when you're on a production and you're in the heat of it, and then you move on to other things, and you then see this thing come out, and you just realize that the gap that was filled between that time is just so immense. Anybody who's been on a game production knows and has probably experienced this one very, very real thing that always happens. Well, hopefully it happens, because if it doesn't happen, it's probably not a good sign for the production. But within the last couple months, the amount of work that ends up going in, it doesn't even make any sense. It's just like the game, like I'm always nervous up until the point of a release, and then suddenly things just start to click. And I'm sure that's probably why Steve has such fond memories of doing that mix, is because, like you said, it was like the audio identity was probably formed right then, because it was like, it's do or die. We got to make this, we got to put it together, take all this great work that we've done and then mix it so that it sort of completes the signature. And it's amazing. Like, it feels like almost an unclimbable mountain. And then, you just put the time in, and you keep your head down and stay on target. And next thing you know, you have this amazing thing that you put out in the world. And then you're sitting there going, please don't hate it. Like, you don't know, because the market can be really weird. I've seen some games go out that, that I was convinced were going to be amazing, and then people just don't like it. And then it's the other way around too. You think, oh, I don't know, it's just, maybe it's not done, it's not polished enough. And people they just something about it. The people just grab onto it, and they just love it. So you never really know. All you can really do is put your heart and soul into it, stay open to the cosmos, as Steve would say, and listen to those opportunities, and try to put that lightning in a bottle whenever possible. That's all you can do. At the end of the day, you can't worry about how it's going to do, because you don't really have any final full control over that. All you can do is control your effort and the creativity and the sort of the collaboration that you bring to the table, and that's all you can do. So if you approach every day with that attitude, there's a very good chance that what you're going to produce at the end, especially if there's enough other people on the team doing the same thing, it's going to be great. So I'd just like to thank Steve again for being here. David, obviously, as usual, for being my partner in crime. I hope you all had an amazing holiday. Hopefully you did take enough time for yourselves to turn off and just be with your family, be with loved ones. And, I think it's really important as creatives in an industry that's very demanding of our creativity, that we do find a time to distance ourselves and just switch off. I have a hard time doing it myself. I'm sure a lot of you do as well, but it's super important. So hopefully you all found some time to do that. And hopefully, you always find a way of doing that throughout the year, so that you don't, burn out, because we know that that's not fun, and nobody wants to go through that. Have a really good January. I'm excited about what's going to be happening here at Agora.Community. We're going to be, we already got a lot of people on the list on the schedule, and there's more to come as we schedule more people in. There's a lot of conversations already ongoing for some great guests. So I will see you here every week as usual. So it was great to have Steve on as our first guest of the year, and I'm looking forward to all the many more to come. Stay animated. Cheers, guys and girls.